god, is that a goth dummy mommy? Goth dummy mommy! Goth dummy mommy! Goth dummy mommy! Goth dummy mommy! Goth dummy
Sorry,
mommy!
I'm not
Goth dummy mommy! Goth dummy mommy! Goth
sorry.
Let's talk about TikTok goths. I don't have a camera yet, so I'll just put some videos of Robert Smith in the background. That's basically what I look like. Now, except for being really cringy, what's actually wrong with TikTok goths, and what can we do to stop them? This topic is a really tricky one, because it usually just ends up on both sides going around in circles. TikToker makes a really cringy video about goths, goths see it and point out what's wrong with him, he starts getting some views for about a week and then everyone forgets about it. 2 weeks later, he's found another way to be cringy and the cycle repeats again. Boom, 900,000 followers. Now, this is not gonna be another 20-minute video talking about how cringe TikTokers are, because I genuinely don't care. What I do want to talk about is the effect these videos have on goth culture and how in the world we ended up like this. How did we go from one of the most exciting music genres of the 80s to, well, basically a search term. This is the TikTokification of goth culture and the many problems it has brought to the genre. If you can't tell by now, this video was meant to only talk about goths, but then Caroline Carr dropped this. So I'm gonna talk about punk as well, but I'll talk about that girl at the end of the video. For now, make sure to subscribe if you like old music, and let's get into it. To fully understand the problems with punks and goths today, we need to go back and learn about the rich history of these two genres. How were they created, and what do they actually stand for? Hopefully, learning about this can give you guys some context for my complaints with punk today, and you can actually see what's wrong with TikTok punks. So, this is gonna be the history of punk and goth in 10 minutes or less. Let's go. It's 400 AD and the Roman Empire was starting to fall. No, just kidding. Let's start with punks. Punks had their early roots in the mid-1960s with the start of garage rock and bands being less quote-unquote professional and more raw and untutored. With bands like the Standalls, the Sonics and the Seeds, people were starting to get the idea that you didn't need to be the Beatles to make music, and everyone could actually get into it. Despite these bands being an important footstep on punk's history, it was gonna take a whole other decade for this idea to really go mainstream. During this decade, bands like the Velvet Underground, the Stooges, the New York Dolls and Alice Cooper were starting to form, which would take the sound of the early garage rock bands and evolve it into a little something called Proto Punk. I don't know if you can tell by the name, but Proto Punk was very important to punk because of two reasons. One, it was a big step musically for the genre, with bands like the Stooges and the Velvet Underground who are still influencing bands to this day. I have a whole video about that last one, by the way. But also, politics were becoming a big part of the genre, with leftist ideas about the working class and an anyone can do it ideology, and let's not forget, ideas about sexuality and gender. I feel crazy every time I have to talk about this, but believe it or not guys, trans people actually existed in the 60s, and they were a very important part of punk's history. Bands like the New York Dolls, and well later David Bowie himself, were directly inspired by the trans people in these movements. The New York Dolls went on to create the term glam punk. Okay, I know this is getting a little bit too much, and there's a lot of history I'm probably leaving out. The main things you need to know about Proto Punk are the DIY anyone can do it culture, working class pride, and really ahead of their time's views about gender. Also, they were pretty fucking raw, and they sounded better than garage rock. A couple years later, in 1975, Patti Smith released her debut album, Horses. And in the same year, the music magazine Punk was created, which featured Patti herself in their second issue. This basically marked the start of the punk genre in New York, and clubs like Max's Kansas City and CBGB were gonna be the birthplace of legendary punk bands like the Ramones, Television, Blondie, and the Talking Heads. The Ramones was probably the most important band to punk at this era, and is still considered by some as the first ever punk band. Their fast and distorted guitars would reach all the way to London, where the punk scene was about to really blow up. Now here is where punk takes its ultimate form, because of one main reason: the huge difference between 70s New York and 70s Britain. I know everyone jokes about how Britain is a shithole, but the 70s and 80s were probably the darkest times for the country, because of a certain ginger woman.
Do you think Margaret Thatcher had girl power?
Yes, of course.
Do you think she effectively utilized girl power by funneling money to illegal paramilitary death squads in Northern Ireland?
I don't know about that.
Without getting too deep into that, just know that Margaret is one of the most evil and unlikable people in Britain's history, And that's saying a lot, seeing how everyone in that country is evil. With a cruel conservative government who was starting wars for nothing, and a royal family who didn't give a shit about their people, the British youth was starting to wake up. They were desperately looking for a way to stand up to all the nonsense that was going on, and punk couldn't have started at a better time. Okay, quick correction, Margaret was actually elected after punk became a thing, and it was goth and post-punk bands who ended up forming while she was in power. I know Morrissey hated her guts. Before her, it was the Labour Party, which Kevin O'Morgan described as this. So it was a dark time for working class Brits nonetheless, but yeah, sorry, I don't know too much about British politics. Malcolm McLaren, the manager of the New York Dolls, returned to London and along with the well-known Vivienne Westwood, started a clothing brand called Sex. This was also a crucial part of punk, sexual liberation, and a clothing style that made them stand out from the conservatives in the country. Something very similar was also going to be adapted by the Goth scene. Oh yeah, they also created that one funny punk band. Despite being created just so Vivienne could sell some shirts, the Sex Pistols became the punk band, and Nevermind the Bollocks became one of the most iconic albums in music history. With openly rebellious lyrics and an attitude that was never seen before, the Sex Pistols told the British people what punk was, and the youth finally felt like they could express themselves against the tyrannous conservative government that was ruining their lives. Slowly but surely, new punk bands were starting to form everywhere, with legendary names like The Clash, Susie and the Banshees, The Adverts, Buzzcocks. Punk became a cultural phenomenon that was gonna last for decades to come. In 1976, the Sex Pistols went on the Anarchy Tour, which ended up creating a lot of buzz for them around the country. The reason for this was that many of the gigs would be cancelled, and the band would end up on the papers like every other week. The peak of their career though was probably the 1st of December 1976 when they approved this interview. Let's start off with the main problem everyone had with this thing. The swearing. Yeah, now it just seems normal, but in a conservative 70s Britain, that seemed very rude, and it actually ended up making the news. This incident got so big that it basically got punk to go mainstream. Were the pistols loaded? Rock called filth? How dare teenagers swear on live television? This generation is doomed. Everyone got angry at them for swearing, that they completely ignored the fact that the interviewer was hitting on a 19-year-old girl. The British public really had their priorities straight. The other thing I need to address is the little symbols they have on their sleeves, but don't worry, I'll talk about that later. The main point of this whole thing was that punk had gone mainstream, which basically just killed it right then and there. There were two reasons for this. Punks were really against being mainstream, and they thought that you were a sellout if you tried to actually sell records. The Buzzcocks got a lot of criticism for this, but yeah, this whole thing goes completely against what people on TikTok are doing right now, where they use punk solely for them to get some followers and make some easy cash. Now, I want to make one thing clear. There's nothing wrong with being mainstream, and in my opinion, this was a really stupid thing punks had going on. What is wrong with what TikTok punks do is that the main reason they make punk music is to make money. That's a bad thing to do in any genre, because music should be a way for you to express yourself, and it's very easy to tell when a song is specifically made to sell records, because it has absolutely no soul. I mean, have you heard of Charlie Puth? What is extra wrong with people like Carolyn Carr is that they chose the worst genre to profit from. How are you gonna try and capitalize from the anti-capitalist movement? The second reason why punk died was the low amount of musical experimentation in the genre, because everything besides distorted fast guitars would be considered post-punk. Punk was undoubtedly very influential to rock music, and it evolved into multiple subgenres such as hardcore punk, skate punk, pop punk, thrash metal, and black metal. But I think the most important genre punk created was indeed post-punk. It's a funny t-shirt album. Okay, I did not expect this explanation to go on for this long, and I know that I've left so much important stuff, but I think you guys have enough context about goths and punks by now. Listen to Disintegration by The Cure since I forgot to mention that. Now, let's talk about TikTok goths. I think the main problem with TikTok and goth culture now is the very clear fetishization of goth women, fast fashion, and people forgetting the original sound of the genre. Let's start with the first one. Unless you've been living under a rock for the last 5 years, you've probably seen a meme about finding a goth girlfriend and oh my god, goth dummy mommy, whatever. Now I get that most of these are jokes, and some of them are kinda funny as well. What's not funny is the harassment alternative and goth women get by just existing. There are stories of people barking and making noises towards them on the street. This is a thing that happens a lot apparently. It's gone from sexual liberation to women being embarrassed of walking down the street. It's really gross, and TikTok is definitely the main reason for all of this. I mean, you have memes like this with 1 million likes.
Oh no! Oh no!
And then you have really cringe videos like these.
I'm sorry, I don't think that there are any attractive goth mommy fursuiters. Like, no goth mommy fursuiter is gonna duet this. I wouldn't even want any to duet this, that's weird.
Look, I don't want to be the fun police, because I know how fun it is to say that you want to get pegged by a goth mommy or whatever. But these jokes are very clearly the main reason for the mass fetishization goth women get. Also, you pretending to be ironic and making shitty meta jokes doesn't really fix any of that.
Goth dummy mommy! Goth dummy mommy! Shut the f up, I don't appreciate being fetishized.
Whoa, is that a guy fetishizing a goth girl? That's surprisingly my fetish.
That's why I said in the beginning that it has turned from a beautiful artistic movement to a Pornhub search term. It's become a trend basically. Now, I'm not gonna sit here and say, oh, this girl is actually goth and this one is a poser, blah blah blah, because that's not gonna fix anything. Some people just like the dark makeup and that's fine. The problem with goth and punk trending on TikTok is that it gets watered down and people forget the genre's core values. That's why you see so many people calling out Caroline Carr or Jake Weber for using fast fashion and clearly using these subcultures for their monetary profits. Another thing I want to make clear is that punks were never perfect. They had a massive problem and some of them have just turned into conservatives as they've gotten older. I mean, Iggy Pop kids for fuck's sake. But I think that if we really wanted to, we can be better than the older generations. But to do that, people need to learn about punks and goths history and adapt their core values once again. What else did I want to talk about? Oh yeah, why is the music that these guys make so fucking shit? Like, it's not just their makeup that has been watered down. This music is so soulless as well. I get that everyone has their taste and whatever, but why is it like so clean? This is a problem with most genres now, to be honest, but you'd think you'd never see this problem with punk out of all things. Their song sounds like what I thought hardcore rock was back in middle school when I used to watch Disney Channel. And then TXO makes this video about how he has to be cringy because nobody cares about this type of music anymore.
Do you want to know why I am so cringe? It's because I had to be.
But this argument immediately falls apart when you learn about a certain modern band from Ireland. And of course, I'm talking about Fontaine's DC. I know that technically they were signed to a label, but we live in an era where even labels are using TikTok to promote their bands, because nobody really listens to the radio anymore. Fontaine's DC made it big without having to do any cringe at TikTok or f***ize goth women, or I don't know, kids. They are making punk and goth albums and they genuinely sound fresh and amazing, because it's clear that they know their roots. I mean, if you told me that Ian Curtis somehow got an Irish accent and formed Joy Division once again just to make Skinty Fia, I'd believe you. Doggerel and Skinty Fia are easily one of my favorite albums to come out during the last 5 years, and I'm really excited for their upcoming album in August. They are what you'd consider actual punks, and that's not even what they're going for. They don't have to talk about dog chains or man or whatever. They did it all by talking about the issues that Ireland is going through. So yeah, I know it's a little hard, but if we do try, we can maybe bring actual punk and goth bands back. There are a lot of good bands out there who don't get the attention they deserve from the community, because they're not making cringe TikToks like these. I don't know if this whole rant made sense to all of you, but I've been wanting to talk about this for a long time. Check out my other videos if you want to hear more about music history, and subscribe. Also, give me money on Patreon, I want a camera, please.
Oh no! Oh